Recording in progress. Here we go. Dalit. Tammuz. Dalit. 4 Tammuz. One single chassid or student who devotes his heart, mind, and soul to Torah and to bolstering Torah effects wonders in a large city, in all the city's affairs, in a manner that transcends the natural order by the merit of the fathers of the world. That's in quote. And I have a note here. I don't know where I got it from, but it refers, this was from a note that I wrote in pencil from the Frierdiker Rebbe's letter number 351. This expression, fathers of the world, refers to specifically to our Rebbeim, the chain. And then now going back further, Torah, the Zohar says, Istakle b'daraisa u'bora alma, that Hashem gazes into the Torah and creates the world and all worlds. So when we gaze into the Torah and learn the Torah, we're bringing down hamshochas, energies from the source of Torah, which is the Creator Himself. And of course, that has deep, deep influences, as he says, transcending the natural order, and includes rectifying the natural order. Okay. I think I forgot to, and I will now mute you. So I'll get rid of the background noise. Okay. Lessons in Tanya. Page 978. Top of the page. And look with the Amara. Near the bottom of page 176. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up from the bottom. So, we have been explaining pretty much the Seder HaHestalshalis, the way things devolve, and we were come down, and we were looking at it from one perspective, from the bottom up, which is deed is the bottom, of course. Ma'asahu ha'ikar is the root, and the root means the bottom. It also means it's rooted deep in God's consciousness. God's consciousness is first in thought, is last in deed. His first in thought is this planet Earth with us on it. That's the ikar. And for deed to come into being, there has to be machshava, thought. And so that gave us a topic on yesterday, focusing on the letters. Letters of thought give rise to letters of speech. And he said, particularly in the metaphor of the king, the modality of the king's making anything happen is his speech, his edict. And so we say that this is the Seder HaHestalshalis, and this is the order that's imitated. We're made in God's image. It's imitated. The structure is similar in a human being. However, and that's where we're going to start. However, be'emes, in truth, b'chinas ha'oisis ha'dibra shel mailo, the level of speech, when it refers to God Himself up above, is much, much higher than that wisdom and intellect of creatures. So we have a Seder, right? Then we have Chochmah, Bina, Das, Midos, and then Midos give rise to thought, speech, and action. But when it comes to God's letters of speech, they are much, much higher than anything that we would call down here seichel or intellect. Shari b'maimer ve'oisius, because it's with his speech. Remember, this is the metaphor that we use, that we says v'yipach nase odem. He made the human being with his hierarchy of chokmah, bina, das, and way down lower in the hierarchy, letters. God made man with letters. He says, "Also, Adam is salmeinu. Let us make man in our image. V'nivra Adam bal chochma v'seichel, and a human being was made with seichel." So he said, "Let us make man." That's his words. But those words gave rise to beings, not only human beings, but all the creatures in a structure which is much, much higher than words, starting with Chokhmah. Oyafilu Hevel Ha'elyon. If we go a little bit deeper, remember in the metaphor of words, of language, of coming out of our mouth, yes, it originates in thought, but the proximate cause of the reality, the experience, the actuality of the words is the breath. A Hevel, now we talked about a Hevel Ha'elyon, the supernal breath. Levad, Kedekasiv, it is written, God uses his breath also, right? It says, yes, he created man in his image. And how did he do it? The root of it wasn't actually words. The word of it was his breath, as we say, this is a quote from Bereshis. He blows or blew into his nostrils a living soul. So the living soul, which is the source ultimately of Chabad, is coming from something relatively low in our metaphor, at least, which is the breath. But this breath, and this is his point, this breath and these words, which are godly breaths and words, are much, much higher and in a different realm completely, much higher level than the level of words and breath down here in a human being. So if so, we've given this description of breath and words of Hashem much, much higher than Chokhmah. If so, this Hevel Ha'elyon, hu makar Chokhmah v'haseichel, it's the source of the wisdom, the koyach, or the attribute, or the svira of Chokhmah and intellect, shebin neshamas adam, in the soul of a person. And that person we're speaking about here is not just the person down here below, but the soul of the original human, which is Adam Harishon, Akeleles, which included Kol Neshamas HaSadikim, all the souls of all the righteous, harking back to our fathers of the world in today's Hayom Yom, the source of all sources of all humanity, started with Adam Harishon. And Adam Harishon was created by merely blowing. So we see that I'm emphasizing that word merely, that the breath of his mouth and the words of his mouth are low compared to him himself. And we're getting infusion from a much, much higher level than we can imagine, higher than the proximate source of creation that we learn in Bereshis Bor Lakim. Hashem created, he spoke, and it was. The creation itself is sourced much, much higher than anything we could call breath or speech. And and we said this soul that he blew into the Adam Harishon includes the soul of all the tzaddikim, shehem gedailim emalachei hashoros, which the souls of tzaddikim and the tzaddikim that he created are much, much higher than even the ministering angels. Ministering angels are channels. We've learned this before. They bring the hashpah up and down. The human being is a creative energy that actually changes the world and is placed here. We've been placed here to change the world. Now, how does this work? Because the letters of God himself, Dibura, his letters, may he be blessed, they are, just as they are modeled down here below, this is the way that they're similar to us in our model. The words come from and are drawn down from God's holy midos. Hamiyuchedes, but here's the punchline. The midos and the breath and the words of Hashem are ultimately and always miyuchedes b'mahuse v'asmuse, are always united in his very essence, b'tachlus hayichud, with a complete unity. Which this complete unity goes on and on without end, and really what he means without end, without any level of describing that place at all, and as we've said earlier, without any level of masig, being able to grasp that level at all. And these levels, these words, and these midos are much, much higher of the highest level, which is in the creatures, which is Chokhmah. So now that could beg the question, well, if that's so, that they're higher than words and breath of a human being, why do we use the analogy of words? And they're only called letters legabe hanevroim. Only from our perspective are they called letters. Ela legabe medai sov. But these letters, with which he creates everything, right? Let there be light. Yahi, let there be light. And he speaks that with these letters. But in relation to his holy midos, which these holy midos in their glory and in themselves, meaning also that they belong always to his very self, they're never something separated from him. They're kufbeis mini hamshachas. What are they? And what does it mean it's only from our perspective? Because the whole Tzimtzum we've learned is only something that exists for the sake of creating worlds and beings which have a sense of their separate existence, right? So that whole Tzimtzum of himself, which we use the analogy, he contracted himself, and he contracted himself in particular letters, and particular letters have particular hamshachas. Kaf Beis meaning hamshachas, 22 kinds of drawings down of energy, of chayas, v'chaychas, and powers, shainim zemezeh, which are different from each other, shebehen nivra kol ha'olamis, with which he created all the worlds, alyenim v'taktoinim, upper and lower worlds, v'kol ha'beruim shebesaycham, and all the creations within the worlds, shekach ol beretzoynai, v'chokmasei yisborach, so it rose up in God's will and wisdom, livrei ha'olam b'chof bois mine hamshachas, shainas, to create worlds with 22 different kinds of drawings down of godly energy, dafka specifically. Not less and not more. Mamish 22. And these are the 22 letters, meaning the 22 types of articulative sounds that come out in any language, every language, through the 5 aspects of the mouth, the 5 chaisos hapeh. The breath can form 22 letters, and this is true in any language. Leave aside some of the African languages which have kind of sounds in them, but we're speaking articulated letters, they're exactly 22. As we learn in Sefer Yetzirah about that, and he says in brackets, and their shape, the shape of the letters, we spoke about this at length yesterday, the shape of the letters, whether they're used in a holy Sefer Torah or whether they're used in a Hebrew newspaper, the shape of the letters, that shows, the shape shows on the kind of drawing down that it is. I mean, simple, always the Shem Havaya. The Yud is a point, right? And that's what it is. It's a point that indicates something that is beyond any definition, before, antecedent, deeper than any definition. And from there, there's a spreading out. And the spreading, that little point is called Chokhmah. The spreading out, the Hay, is called Bina. So those shapes indicate what's going on. From a singularity, which is Hashem Yichud, alone, and nothing else beside him, comes out a multiplicity, which is the 3-dimensionality of the letter Hey. Because also the letters of thought that occur in a person, the letters are actually drawn down from intellect and from the midos, Chabad, Chagas, right? From the very essence of the soul, as is written in another place. Point being, for this particular first part, we liken the modality of creation to letters. And the second part today is tell us that these letters are not in the same hierarchical scheme that they exist by us. They exist predecessor and primordial, actually, as the Rebbe Rasham says in Helek Ayin Beis. All the midos are primordial. They exist all the time in what's called the first manifestation of the structure, which comes from these primordial letters, is called Odom Kadma, the primordial man. That's the first indication of a descent and an order of them. But their source is much higher than Chokhmah, much higher than any attribute we can give, are the supernal letters. That's today's Tanya. Comments, questions?
If I may, I think this is a good place to talk about the use of the word higher, and you say deeper sometimes, but it
Well,
seems this is telling us it's even deeper and higher. Those are both dimensions in a way. It's just abstract. It's just much more abstract than anything, or unformed, or like primordial is, I think, helpful. It's just or
good work. Yeah, I
yeah,
like
there's the word short and mucker and things like that, but it's not, that doesn't help us either. Um,
it.
but I
Well,
think, yeah, it's just something up there. There's
it helps.
something
Yeah,
somewhere, far
it-
away that we cannot grasp.
yeah.
I'm not hearing.
No, but it helps me that word abstract because when you abstract something, you remove it from its, from its context. You abstract.
Form, from its form. This has no form, it has no shape, it has no, uh,
Mm.
you can't limits or something.
So
There's one place where you said, um, the letters is in relation to created beings, but I think it says velo nikra b'shem otiot legabe. It's
only,
not,
only.
no, velo. It's not,
Where are you reading?
I'm not, I don't know how many lines back.
Ella lagabi limidaisa. That's the important part. They're not called letters only in relation to the midos.
Right, but not, they're not letters in relation to Nivraim. They're not, it's
Loi nikra b'shem is lagabi nivroim.
right.
From our perspective, these are not letters, right? Only from the perspective of God's holy midos. How does He bring His
Okay.
into expression? We have the metaphor of letters.
In a very abstract plane that's so abstract that we don't understand it.
Yeah,
There's some kind of distinction starting to be made, something like that. Okay, like you
yeah,
say,
yeah.
me. Yeah,
And
okay.
when that distinction is starting to be made, we call them letters. They become distinct channels of, as he says later, distinct channels, distinct kol hamshachas, all the hamshachas, distinct channels. When we look at the different modalities of Hashem expressing Himself, we call them letters. But by His perspective, they're much deeper, higher.
Thank you for posting that
The what?
from
Oh,
from Hashem's perspective.
newspaper. Yeah, the letters retain their
That
whole.
now,
The letters are always holy.
I think, and that, as I said, that's consistent with the Rebbe's approach to the fact that every Jew has the same kedusha as every other Jew, every letter, and wherever it is, has the same kedusha. In relative terms. Again, you're comparing the tzaddik and the Baal Tshuva and the Russia. They're all in some sense equally distant from Hakodesh Baruch Hu, because we're all just Nivraim. We're just
And equally close.
whatever we are.
And equally close.
But what was
Yeah.
the part that he said about in other languages?
Yeah, we don't need to get into it now. We put it to bed yesterday, I think.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
um, Anybody else?
Yeah, hi, Anka. Um, so would you say in terms that Hashem, there's like levels of Simsum, and then the letters come from there after that?
The letters are always representative of Simpson because they represent something. Anything when you're speaking distinctiveness, you can talk about letters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, they're there, and that's what he means by, because from Hashem's perspective, nothing has changed. The creation has done nothing for him or to him. He hasn't changed. Uh, where does change? Once you start talking about change, that's an experience that created beings have. He doesn't experience change. And we experience, and created beings do experience change. And so when we start exploring, when the Kabbalists were given their message from Hashem, and which continues, of course, throughout history, about how to explain that. So we explain that in terms of we can understand what brings about different contexts for ourselves are all the tzimtzumim. The tzimtzum is what creates variability and contextuality. Before the Tzimtzum, there is no context except Hashem. Does that answer your question or not?
No. So my question, I guess, is more, are the letters a product of the Tzimtzum, or are the letters an expression of the Tzimtzum?
The latter. Expression of the Tzimtzum.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that helps me. Thank you.
And anything you speak about, those hevel, breath, the breath is the general expression of the Tzimtzum before particularity. And then the letters are the particular expressions of the Tzimtzum. Yes, but that's good. They are expressions of the Tzimtzum.
Can I mention a complete aside?
Go ahead.
I was listening to Nir Manussi's Gimel Tammuz for bringing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I understood it 100%, but he was talking about how in Chabad there's the different, the Mishachas and, what happened to the Rebbe. So he said the best mashal he could think of was Schrodinger's cat.
Right.
That we really don't know until we open the box. Both states exist now.
Right. That's the frame of Schrodinger's cat. Is it live or dead, or is that moment when there's both? But what does he mean by that? That we really don't know.
I'd have to listen to it again.
He actually said something very beautiful that Rav Ginsburg asked the question, where's the Rebbe? And so the answer is, it depends what level of the soul you're asking about. If you're asking about the nefesh clings to the body. That's at the Ohel. The Rebbe himself, he said, the Frierdiker Rebbe, he's alive and here. And he himself went to the Rebbe's Ohel, because he went to the Frierdiker Rebbe's Ohel, because he went to the nefesh part. And if you're asking where's his ruach is clearly in 770. If you want to get the Rebbe's ruach, you go to 770. And the nefesh ruach neshama is in his Torah. He put all of his neshama into his Torah. If you want the Rebbe's neshama, you learn the Rebbe's Torahs. Isn't that beautiful? And then the chaya and Yechida, he said they're mekifin. So he said the chaya is actually, if you turn around and get kicked out from the Rebbe's presence and go do shlichus, that's your chaya. Then you're living the Rebbe. And then the Yechida, he said the Yechida is the Rebbe's most pintala yid of yearning that the Rebbe most wanted, and that's Mashiach. So when you want to connect to the Rebbe's Yechida, then everything you do, like wherever you go, any words you say, any thought you think, if it's permeated with Mashiach, then you have the Rebbe's Yechida.
Yeah, very nice.
Thank you. That did it perfectly.
Perfect way to start the day. We'll see you tomorrow, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.